Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Many of those who support Boris Johnson argue that what counts is how the nation at large views him, not opposition MPs or Supreme Court justices. The evidence on this is not exactly consistent. Some polls have shown the Tories going great guns since he took over. Others tell a different story. A YouGov poll today showed his personal support falling. So is his do-or-die Brexit language reversing the drift from the Conservatives to the Brexit Party? James Clayton has been to Maidstone in Kent, where tonight the Brexit Party held a rally to find out.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we will not betray the people who sent us here.
Boris Johnson's choice of words last night were described by MPs as irresponsible, inflammatory, unparliamentary even. But outside SW1, what do Leave voters think? In Maidstone, Kent, Nigel Farage is in town, in a constituency that voted 60-40 to Leave. This place is true blue. The Conservatives usually weigh the vote here. At a local cafe, I caught up with Ros, one of those Tory voters. She watched the debate last night and wasn't impressed.
It was very frustrating. They're all just arguing and just not doing anything. They're just having a go at Boris.
Do you support Boris Johnson? Do you think you'll vote for him?
If it comes down to it, yes, I will, because I feel that he's, out of everybody, he's the strongest person to actually deal with it.
And Prime Minister Johnson appears to be going down well with former UKIP voters too. Last night he was talking about surrender, he was talking about betrayal. How does that language play with you?
I feel that the country's being betrayed by not being, getting out. And all I know is he's trying to get the job done.
Others were concerned about Mr Johnson's language, though it didn't appear to put them off.
He needs to control what he says. He's putting the words out too easily without thinking. But other than that, with the good backing of politicians, I think he could do a good job.
Well, we've been here for about 2 hours now. We've spoken to a number of Leave voters. Now, this is clearly not the most scientific venture ever, but what we found is reflected in the polling, which is that a lot of the Leave voters quite like Boris Johnson and certainly aren't put off by what he's been doing over recent weeks. This is the BBC's poll tracker from this year. Note the Boris bounce when Prime Minister Johnson was anointed. And this is the point when Johnson prorogued Parliament. If there was an impact on Conservative polling, it was negligible. And where did Mr Johnson's bounce come from? Well, you don't need to be a psephologist to see that Conservative uptick mirrored by a Brexit Party downturn in the polls. If Boris Johnson is to win a majority, he needs that Brexit Party vote to fall even further. Yesterday, Nigel Farage went on to Good Morning Britain and called for Boris Johnson to resign over that failed attempt to prorogue Parliament. He then tweeted that appearance. Now, what's interesting about that is a number of self-declared Brexit Party supporters tweeted back at him saying that they didn't support that call. So what did Brexit Party supporters think at their rally here in Maidstone tonight? Well, interestingly, they seemed divided on the issue. Do you agree with Nigel Farage saying that Boris Johnson should resign for attempting to prorogue Parliament?
Yes.
You agree with that? You think Boris Johnson should resign?
Oh yes, yes. I think that anything.
You don't think she should? No. Go on then, madam. What do you think?
No, you can carry on.
No.
I'm surprised you've said that actually, with the intention of Corbyn and co to slip in by the back door.
Whatever Boris Johnson does, you're all going to vote for the Brexit Party.
Yes.
We need to change.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I will.
Got to change.
Absolutely.
I'm ready. Would you consider voting for Boris Johnson?
I would, yes.
So you're at a Brexit Party rally and you'd consider voting for the leader of another party?
Well, I got these tickets whilst Theresa May was still in power, so yeah.
Boris Johnson was chosen as leader in part to kill off Nigel Farage's Brexit Party.
Extraordinary week.
That certainly hasn't happened, but there's more than enough evidence here to show that Farage supporters like Boris Johnson an awful lot more than his predecessor.
James Clayton out on the road there. Now, how do those signs of the way the electorate is moving on the right align with the bigger picture of the electoral contest that could be unleashed within weeks? To assess the possible public reactions to this week's Westminster meltdown, we're joined by Salma Khan Sharp, formerly a Conservative Special Advisor at the Treasury, David Yelland, who edited The Sun in the early noughties, and James Morris, who is a pollster who worked for Ed Miliband and Tony Blair. Welcome to all of you. David, let's just start off with this type of language that Boris Johnson has been using. Is it going to work in the country at large, even if it appalls what you might call the political establishment in large part?
Well, we'll find out when we get to an election, but I think the problem for Boris Johnson and the people in Downing Street is that they're populists, but they're not very good at it. It's interesting, if you looked at today's papers, Thursday's papers, Brexit papers, their language was much more moderate than that of the Prime Minister in the Commons yesterday. And that tells you everything, actually. We've got a Prime Minister with more tabloid than the tabloids, but isn't actually a tabloid person.
Why aren't they picking it up, though?
Because well, that's a very good question, for different reasons, but basically it doesn't play with all their readers.
Is he right in his assumptions that taunting Corbyn will deliver electoral effect, or might that bounce back on him?
So the way to think about the next election is there are three contests. There's a contest for the Leave vote, which is the split between the Tory and Brexit Party, a contest for the Remain vote, primarily between Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and then there's a competition about whether domestic policy gets on the agenda, NHS, tax, they have different things. So to judge the electoral impact of what he's doing now, you have to think about how it plays on each of those three things. So why is he having trouble squeezing that 14% of Brexit Party voters? They are tribally anti-Tory, and the previous Tory leadership tried to turn the Tory brand to make it more friendly to them. Is there anything he's doing now that shows the Tory party is different to the for the rich, for the toff image that they have? No. So I can't see how it helps there. What is it doing on the Labour-Liberal Democrat contest? It is uniting people around a determination to replace the Prime Minister, and so we'll turbocharge tactical voting. And it's not putting domestic policy on the agenda either. So it's hard to see how it helps.
There is a national sort of groundswell of get on with it, isn't there?
Get on with it, absolutely. And that's why Labour's got in this difficult position where it doesn't know where to be.
Salma, I just wondered, with your experience with working with people like Sajid Javid, who were in Cabinet with Boris Johnson, what will their feeling be about taking this political route?
I think what's interesting is that a lot of people around the cabinet table were present for the 2017 general election. And so it's quite interesting that they are still basically signing up to a strategy that is not dissimilar to the one that was put in forth at that point. Boris is being successful in reuniting the Leave vote. You're right, there is no domestic agenda which to speak of. We are 3 years in and people are getting very frustrated with what's going on. But I think there is very little room to manoeuvre from the position that he's taken. So do or die actually makes a lot of sense in this context and the election strategy that he's trying to pursue.
And they've hitched their wagon
and they've
to
hit
his
their
political
wagon,
star, and they have no choice but to support him at this point now, you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think they all know that the Labour Party, certainly in Parliament, the Liberal Democrats, they're not going to give an inch and they're not going to go in for anything that Boris wants to do, whether that's getting a deal or, at this point, getting a general election where he might have some maximum uplift from it. I think they have to go along with what's happening now.
Let's quickly just look at two of the front pages tomorrow, because this sense of a sort of unrepentant Downing Street, in a way, comes across quite clearly. You've got Dominic Cummings. Now, these are remarks he made at a book launch event earlier this evening, and we had a sample of it earlier when we were talking with Nick Watt. This is the sort of, what did MPs expect? You know, essentially that they're getting in the way of the Brexit process, and so they should expect public frustration. The Times has a more, if you like, apocalyptic or inflammatory message: deliver Brexit or face riots. Now, that is, I should say, an unnamed senior cabinet minister, they say, has given them that line, that essentially national frustration has reached that point. David, what's the best Labour or Lib Dem counter to this type of spin, do you think, in terms of...
To remind the voters and the country that Boris Johnson created this entire situation himself. And the one thing that everyone forgets is that if Brexit is impossible, and I personally think it is, it's impossible without causing huge economic and political consequences to our position in the world, then we're in the foothills of this controversy, of the anger that we saw in the Commons yesterday, because if we do exit, that's when the crisis really starts.
So I understand that it is a difficult process. This is obviously going to be a very messy divorce, deal or no deal. I think the bigger issue is that, for me, Brexit is also a symptom of something else, of people that feel that they were left behind. And this is something that is a problem for Labour. It is something that's a problem for the Liberal Democrats. And actually, there is a lot of frustration. And that front page on The Times, I don't think is exaggerated. I think people feel incredibly angry about what has happened. And you've got to also think about the trust in democracy.
Part of the messaging at the moment, and we saw it hammered away yesterday in the Commons, is that Jeremy Corbyn is frightened of an election. To what extent do you think he is, or to what extent could actually Labour support bounce back in ways that could give the lie?
It's a very weak message, that, because we're talking about a difference of a couple of weeks, and the Labour line is pretty clear, which is...
Get us past the 31st.
The Supreme Court has said you haven't obeyed the law. We don't trust you to do it, so do it, and then we'll have an election. So Labour doesn't look like it's backing off an election, and the idea that running around in a chicken suit is make any difference to the election outcome is just ludicrous.
I agree with that. I think actually the Sun, the Mail, Telegraph this morning, and even the Times to a degree, telling their readers that the opposition parties are frightened of an election. I think people know that is not the case. They can work out what's actually happening.
I think there's something more sophisticated happening here. I think that, the A/B testing that's been done on the messaging on social media, I think there will be some resonance in the same way that David Cameron kept having a go at Gordon Brown, to give him the election in 2010. I think it does set that narrative about lack of leadership.
Do you think that the sort of idea that Dominic Cummings likes to project of himself as this wise Mekon with a great idea of strategy has some substance to it, in the sense that those who are campaigning for an extension, do they even know what they would do with that time?
If there was scrutiny on that, that would be a problem, but there isn't. That's not what the debate is about at the moment. Dominic Cummings has inherited a situation with the most unpopular leader of the opposition ever. And he took a candidate who was extremely popular in London, actually a very good communicator when he does it right, and has got into this unbelievable mess. So it is true that by dividing the Remain vote and juxtaposing Corbyn and Boris, he can win. But the idea that's genius is perhaps a little bit exaggerated.
The British media have a history of turning these sort of Svengali characters into quote-unquote geniuses. Happened to Alistair Campbell. It happened to lots of people. He's not a genius. I mean, look at it. He's not a genius.
You've been in the room there. What's your perception?
I think he's very smart. I think you're right. I think we like to create these mythical figures.
But park the Cummings factor. Do you think that forcing Boris Johnson into an extension, as Nick Bowles put it, getting him to turn in the wind, will have the political power that these opposition MPs who are trying to do this feel it will have, or will it just enrage people that they have delayed Brexit again for no good purpose?
I think all this debate, if I may say so, is in the weeds. The actual reality of it is that Brexit will not work, as I said earlier. And when we, and that is the big, we're 2 days away from a Prime Minister having lost 11-0 in the Supreme Court, and we're not even talking about that. We're not talking about Brexit. We're talking about the day-to-day shenanigans.
Thank you for that reality check. I'm sorry we've got to leave it there. David, James and Sana, thank you all so much.